The night was warm, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden. Inside the cozy suburban home, the Baxter family had settled in for the evening. The soft hum of the baby monitor echoed in the living room, where Emily sat curled up on the couch, a book resting in her lap. Michael was nearby, sipping on a glass of water, his eyes occasionally flickering toward the monitor screen, where their 6-month-old son, Noah, slept soundly in his crib. Everything was peaceful, too peaceful. Titan, their loyal pit bull, lay at the foot of the couch. He had been with the Baxters since he was a pup, strong, intelligent, and fiercely protective. His ears twitched, his large, muscular frame perfectly still, as if listening for something unseen. Then, without warning, his body went rigid. A low growl rumbled from his throat, deep and threatening. Michael looked up, startled. "What is it, boy?" Titan didn't respond. His amber eyes locked onto the hallway leading to the bedrooms, his nostrils flaring. Emily straightened, setting her book aside. "Michael, look at him. Something's wrong." Michael frowned. He had seen Titan alert before, but this was different, more intense. The dog's entire body was tense, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to explode. Then came the sound, a faint, almost imperceptible rustling. From Noah's room, a chill ran down Michael's spine. Without hesitation, he shot to his feet, Emily right behind him. But Titan was faster. With a sudden burst of movement, the dog lunged forward, dashing down the hallway. His nails scratched against the wooden floor as he skidded to a stop at Noah's door, letting out a fierce, guttural bark. Michael's heart pounded. He shoved the door open and froze. In the dim glow of the nightlight, something coiled near Noah's crib. A snake. Its thick, scaly body slithered forward, its head raised, tongue flicking in and out. The reptile was dangerously close, mere inches from Noah's tiny fingers, which twitched as he stirred in his sleep. For a second, everything seemed to slow. Then, in a blur of motion, Titan attacked. The pit bull leaped, his powerful jaws snapping onto the snake's midsection. The creature whipped violently, trying to free itself, but Titan refused to let go. He thrashed his head, sending the serpent slamming against the wall. Emily screamed. Michael grabbed Noah, pulling him away just as the snake lunged again. But Titan was relentless. With a final, bone-crushing clamp of his jaws, Titan tore the snake away from the crib and threw it across the room. It hit the floor with a dull thud, coiling in pain before finally falling still. Panting heavily, Titan stood protectively in front of Noah's crib, his chest rising and falling in rapid succession. His fur bristled, his lips curled back in a silent snarl, as if daring the snake to move. But it didn't. Michael, his breath shaky, turned to Emily, who was clutching Noah to her chest, her face pale. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. Titan let out a slow, low growl, his stance unwavering. Even in the aftermath, he refused to back down. Michael stepped forward carefully, nudging the lifeless snake with his foot. "It's dead," he muttered, his voice still laced with adrenaline. Emily exhaled sharply, sinking onto the nearby rocking chair. She pressed Noah closer, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. Titan, his job done, finally allowed himself to relax. His body loosened, and with one last protective glance at Noah, he slumped onto the floor. Michael crouched beside him, running a hand over his strong, broad head. "You saved him," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our son." Titan let out a deep breath, pressing his head into Michael's palm. Emily, tears spilling onto her cheeks, looked down at the dog, their hero. Without him, Noah wouldn't have stood a chance. Titan had sensed the danger before anyone else, and because of that, their baby was still alive. As the weight of the moment settled over them, Emily reached out, placing a gentle hand on Titan's back. "We owe you everything, boy." Titan let out a quiet, contented huff, his tail thumping weakly against the floor. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because they were his family, and he would protect them, always. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sounds in the room were the rapid breathing of Emily and Michael, the faint rustling of Noah stirring in his mother's arms, and the heavy, exhausted panting of Titan. The snake lay motionless on the floor, its body twisted and lifeless. Even in the dim light, Michael could see the dark, diamond-shaped patterns on its thick scales, a telltale sign of a venomous species. His stomach turned. If Titan hadn't been there, Michael forced himself to push the thought away. Emily, still trembling, held Noah closer, her fingers gripping his soft baby blanket as if afraid to let go. Her wide, tear-filled eyes flicked between the snake and their dog, whose body was still rigid with tension. Titan hadn't fully relaxed yet. His deep brown eyes remained locked on the fallen creature, his ears perked, as if expecting it to strike again. His protective instincts were still in overdrive. Michael swallowed hard and turned to Emily. "Are you okay?" His voice came out shakier than he intended. Emily nodded, but she didn't speak. Instead, she looked down at Titan, the reason their son was still alive. Michael exhaled and reached out, gently running his fingers through Titan's short, warm fur. The dog's body was hot with adrenaline, but at his owner's touch, he finally let out a slow breath and eased into the floor. Michael turned back to the snake, his eyes narrowing. How did it get in here? Their home was in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, not the kind of place where deadly snakes casually slithered into nurseries. The windows were closed. The doors were locked. And yet, a predator had somehow found its way into their baby's room. The thought sent an icy chill down his spine. He stood abruptly. "I'm getting rid of this thing." Emily nodded stiffly. She didn't want to see the snake any longer than necessary. Michael grabbed an old towel from the laundry basket in the hallway, cautiously wrapping it around the lifeless reptile before scooping it up. Even though it was dead, he remained on edge, gripping it tightly as he walked out of the room. Emily stayed where she was, still holding Noah protectively in her arms. Her mind raced, her body still buzzing with leftover panic. She could feel her son's tiny heartbeat against her chest, his warmth anchoring her to reality. Titan let out a low, reassuring grunt and slowly lifted himself onto his paws. He stepped closer to Emily and nudged her knee gently with his snout. She let out a shaky laugh, tears still brimming in her eyes. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, stroking the top of his head. "You knew something was wrong before we did." Titan sat beside her, his large frame pressed against her leg. It was as if he was telling her, "It's okay now. I'm here." Emily took a deep breath and ran her fingers over Titan's broad shoulders. She had always known he was protective, but tonight had proven something much bigger. Titan wasn't just a pet. He was their guardian, their family. He strode across the backyard, his grip firm around the wrapped-up snake. He needed it gone. He had never been a man who feared much. He had served as a firefighter for nearly a decade, facing blazing infernos, collapsing buildings, and life-or-death rescues. But this was different. This had come for his son. Michael reached the farthest end of their yard and placed the snake inside a metal trash can, slamming the lid shut. He exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the remaining tension. Then, something caught his eye. A gap, right near the foundation of the house, just below the nursery window, was a small opening in the lattice. It was barely noticeable, but just big enough for something to slither through. Michael clenched his jaw. That's how it got in. A rush of anger and unease coiled in his gut. If this had happened once, it could happen again. Not on his watch. Michael took a deep breath and marched back toward the house. He needed to secure every possible entry point. He wouldn't let another snake, or any threat, come near his family again. Emily sat in the nursery rocking chair, gently swaying back and forth with Noah cradled against her chest. Titan lay beside them, his massive body stretched out, still keeping watch. Michael re-entered the room, his face set with determination. "I found where it got in." Emily looked up sharply. "Where?" "A small gap under the nursery window," he said, his voice firm. "I'm sealing it tonight." Emily exhaled, nodding. "Good. I don't ever want to go through this again." Neither did Michael. He crouched down beside Titan, his expression softening as he looked at the dog. "I don't know how you knew, but you saved his life. He ran a hand over Titan's strong shoulders. "We owe you, buddy." Titan blinked slowly, his tail thumping once against the floor. Michael exchanged a look with Emily. There were no words that could fully express their gratitude. Titan had proven something that night. Not all heroes wore capes. Some walked on four legs. And this hero? He had teeth, courage, and an unbreakable love for the little boy he had vowed to protect. The night was far from over. Even though the immediate danger had passed, the atmosphere inside the house remained thick with tension. Every creak of the wooden floors, every rustling leaf outside, sent an icy shiver down Emily's spine. She couldn't shake the image from her mind. Titan lunging, the snake striking, Noah lying so helplessly in his crib. It was too much. She ran a shaky hand through her dark, tousled hair and looked down at Noah, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms, completely unaware of how close he had come to tragedy. Titan sat beside her, his deep brown eyes never leaving her face. He could sense her unease. He always could. Emily reached down, her fingers brushing over Titan's broad head. "You saved him," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You saved my baby." Titan didn't move, but his tail gave a slow, steady wag, as if to say, "Of course I did." Michael, who had just returned from sealing the gap outside, leaned against the nursery doorway, watching them both. He had been quiet since disposing of the snake, too quiet. Emily could see it in his face. The guilt, the fear, the silent battle raging inside him. She knew him well enough to recognize when he was blaming himself. He crossed the room and crouched beside Titan, gently running his fingers through the dog's short fur. "You took a hit, didn't you, boy?" His voice was low, rough. Titan's muscles tensed slightly under Michael's touch. Emily's breath hitched. Until now, she had been too focused on Noah, too consumed by her own terror to really look at Titan. But now, under the dim nursery light, she could see it. A deep, angry gash just above his shoulder. Blood had matted his fur in a dark, rust-colored patch. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, her heart clenching. "Michael, he's hurt." Michael's jaw tightened. "I know." He stood quickly and strode toward the hallway. "I'll get the first aid kit." Titan didn't whimper, didn't flinch. He sat there, stoic, as if the pain was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But Emily knew better. She placed Noah gently back into his crib, brushing a tender hand over his chubby little cheek before turning her full attention to Titan. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she reached for his wound. "Oh, buddy," she murmured, her throat tightening. Titan's deep, soulful eyes met hers, and for a moment, she swore he was telling her, "I'd do it again." Michael returned moments later with the first aid kit, his expression tight with focus. "We need to clean it," he said, setting the kit down and pulling out antiseptic wipes and gauze. "It doesn't look like a full bite, but the fangs definitely grazed him." Emily swallowed hard. "Is it bad?" Michael hesitated before shaking his head. "I don't think so, but we'll keep an eye on him, make sure there's no infection or swelling. If there is, we take him to the vet first thing in the morning." He knelt beside Titan, placing a reassuring hand on his side. "All right, buddy, this is gonna sting." Titan didn't move. Michael took a deep breath and pressed the antiseptic wipe against the wound. Titan flinched. A low, deep growl rumbled from his chest, but he didn't snap, didn't pull away. He just endured it. Emily's eyes stung with tears. "He's so strong." Michael nodded, his own voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, he is." Slowly, carefully, he worked, cleaning the wound, pressing gauze against it, and finally wrapping a bandage around Titan's shoulder. Through it all, Titan remained still. Emily gently cupped the dog's face in her hands once Michael finished. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. Titan let out a deep sigh, his warm breath fanning against her skin. Michael watched the exchange, his heart twisting. For years, he had thought of Titan as just their family dog, a loyal, protective companion. But tonight, Titan had proven something much more. He wasn't just part of their family. He was their guardian, and he had been willing to give his life for them. Michael exhaled and ran a hand over Titan's head. "You're a damn hero. You know that?" Titan blinked, his tail thumping once against the floor. Michael let out a low chuckle. Yeah, you know. Emily wiped at her damp cheeks and took a deep breath. Tonight had changed everything. They would never forget what Titan had done, and from this moment on, they would never take him for granted again. The house was quiet, but not with the peaceful stillness of an ordinary night. This was the kind of silence that settled in after a storm. Heavy, tense, filled with unspoken words and emotions too raw to name. Emily sat on the couch, staring at the baby monitor resting on the coffee table. The tiny screen displayed Noah sleeping soundly in his crib, his little chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The sight should have comforted her. It didn't. Her mind kept replaying the horrifying moment from earlier. The glint of the snake's scales in the dim light, Titan's sudden leap, the sickening snap of powerful jaws closing around the writhing creature. She shivered. Michael sat beside her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. He hadn't said much since tending to Titan's wound. He, too, was lost in thought. Titan lay on the floor near their feet, his head resting on his massive paws. His usual alertness was gone, replaced by exhaustion. His breathing was deep but slow, his body still, except for the occasional twitch of his ears. Emily bit her lip, watching him. "Is he okay?" she whispered, afraid to speak too loudly, as if she might disturb the fragile calm hanging over them. Michael lifted his head, his expression unreadable. "I think so." She frowned. "You think?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I've cleaned and dressed plenty of wounds before, Em. His doesn't look deep, but snake bites are tricky. Even if it wasn't a full strike, there's always a risk." Emily's stomach clenched. Risk of what? Michael hesitated. Infection. Or, if there was any venom, even a small amount. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, Titan's going to be fine. He has to be." Michael met her gaze, and for the first time that night, she saw it. The same fear she felt reflected in his eyes. They had almost lost Noah, and now they might lose Titan, too. A lump rose in her throat. She slid off the couch, kneeling beside Titan, running her fingers gently over his fur. His body was warm, his breathing steady but slower than usual. "Titan," she murmured. His ears twitched, and his eyes cracked open just slightly, but he didn't lift his head. Michael exhaled. "He's just exhausted, Em. He fought off a damn snake and took a hit in the process." "He's probably drained," Emily nodded, but unease coiled in her chest like a vice. Titan had always been strong, indestructible. He was the protector of their family, the one who stood between them and danger without hesitation. The thought of him being vulnerable, of something actually hurting him, was unbearable. She ran her hand down his back in slow, soothing strokes. "I'm staying with him tonight," she said softly. Michael sighed but didn't argue. Instead, he reached for the folded blanket on the armrest and draped it over her shoulders. "Then I'm staying too." They sat there in silence, watching over their hero as the weight of the night finally settled over them. Emily had drifted in and out of sleep, her head resting against Michael's shoulder. The early morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow over the living room. Titan hadn't moved much throughout the night. His breathing remained steady, but he was lethargic, barely lifting his head when Emily stirred. A cold dread crept up her spine. Something wasn't right. Michael, sensing her tension, was already on his feet. "I'll call the vet." Emily swallowed hard, running a hand through Titan's fur. He wasn't whining, wasn't shaking, but he wasn't himself either. She had seen him injured before. This was different. Minutes felt like hours as Michael spoke to the vet on the phone, nodding grimly as he listened. When he hung up, his face was tight with concern. "They want us to bring him in now." Emily didn't need to be told twice. She jumped up, grabbing her keys, and together, they carefully helped Titan to his feet. He wobbled slightly but managed to stand, his muscles tense with effort. His eyes met Emily's, and for a brief moment, she swore she saw something there. An apology, as if he knew she was worried, as if he was telling her, "I'll be okay." But Emily wasn't willing to take that chance. She wouldn't lose him. Not after everything. Not after he had saved her son's life. Emily sat stiffly in the cold, sterile waiting room, her arms wrapped protectively around Noah. The rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall felt like a hammer striking her nerves, each second dragging on endlessly. Michael, unable to sit still, paced back and forth. His fingers ran through his hair, his body tense with frustration. As a firefighter, he was trained to handle life-or-death situations, but standing here, powerless, was unbearable. They had arrived just in time for the vet to administer the antivenom, but now all they could do was wait and hope. The doors to the emergency treatment room remained shut. No sounds, no updates. The silence was suffocating. Emily pressed a kiss to Noah's forehead, whispering a silent prayer. "Titan saved our baby's life," she murmured. "He doesn't deserve this." Michael stopped pacing and clenched his fists. "If anyone can survive this, it's him." His voice was firm, but doubt lingered in his eyes. Just then, the double doors swung open, and Dr. Calloway stepped out, pulling off her gloves. Michael and Emily jumped to their feet, their hearts hammering. "Titan is alive," the vet announced. Emily let out a sharp gasp, her knees nearly buckling with relief. Michael exhaled deeply, but his relief was short-lived when he saw the serious expression on Dr. Calloway's face. "But he's not out of danger yet," she continued. "The venom spread quickly. We administered the antivenom, but his body is under severe stress. The next 24 hours will determine if he pulls through." Emily clutched Michael's arm. "Can we see him?" Dr. Calloway nodded. "Just for a few minutes. He's sedated, but he might be able to hear you." They followed her through the doors into the dimly lit recovery room. Titan lay on a padded table, hooked up to 4 fluids, his powerful body now unnervingly still. His breathing was slow and shallow, his usual strong presence reduced to a fragile state. Michael swallowed hard and placed a gentle hand on Titan's head. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You did good." Emily leaned in, stroking Titan's fur. "You saved Noah, Titan. Now you have to fight for yourself." Titan didn't stir, but Emily swore she saw the faintest twitch of his tail. Michael exhaled. "He's still in there." Dr. Calloway gave a small nod. "He's a fighter. We just have to give him time." But time was the one thing they feared was running out. The night passed in agonizing slowness. Michael and Emily refused to leave Titan's side, watching every shallow breath he took, every flicker of his closed eyelids. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only reassurance that he was still with them. Emily had tried to sleep, curled up in the uncomfortable waiting room chair with Noah on her lap, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment Titan lunged at the snake, saw his body convulse from the venom. She shuddered, pulling Noah closer. Michael hadn't even tried to rest. He stood near Titan, his hand never leaving the dog's thick fur. He whispered words of encouragement, as if his voice alone could pull Titan back from the edge. Around dawn, Dr. Calloway entered the room, checking Titan's vitals. Michael and Emily straightened anxiously. "His heart rate is stabilizing," she said, her voice cautious. "That's a good sign. But his body is still fighting the venom. The next few hours will be critical." Emily exhaled shakily. "So he has a chance?" Dr. Calloway gave a small nod. "Yes, but he's weak. If he makes it through the morning, I'd say his odds improve significantly." Michael clenched his jaw. "Come on, buddy. You can do this." Then, something happened. Titan's ear twitched. Emily gasped, grabbing Michael's arm. "Did you see that?" Michael leaned in, his heart pounding. "Titan?" The dog's eyes fluttered open, just a sliver of deep brown peeking through. His body remained still, but the movement was enough to send a wave of hope crashing over them. Dr. Calloway smiled slightly. "That's a good sign. He knows you're here." Emily bit her lip, tears welling up. She bent down, pressing a gentle kiss to Titan's head. "You came back to us." Titan let out the softest whimper, barely audible, but it was enough. Michael exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Dr. Calloway. "What happens next?" "If he continues improving, we'll start reducing the sedation and see if he can hold his own without the 4 fluids." But for now, he needs rest. Michael nodded, finally allowing himself to hope. Emily wiped at her tears. You saved Noah, Titan. And now you're saving yourself. Titan's tail gave the faintest thump against the table, a silent promise that he wasn't done fighting yet. As the sun peeked through the hospital window, casting a golden hue over Titan's resting form, hope flickered in Michael and Emily's hearts. The fight wasn't over, but their brave protector had taken a step toward recovery. Michael stretched his stiff limbs, his body aching from hours without sleep. He glanced at Emily, who was cradling a drowsy Noah in her arms. She looked exhausted, but there was relief in her eyes. Dr. Calloway entered the room, her presence now more reassuring than daunting. She checked Titan's vitals, her expression neutral but observant. After a moment, she finally spoke. His body is responding well. His vitals have improved overnight. Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. So, he's going to make it? Dr. Calloway offered a small smile. I can't say for certain just yet, but if he keeps this progress, there's a strong chance. Michael exhaled, running a hand down his face. What's the next step? We'll reduce his 4 fluids and sedation slowly to see if he can regain strength on his own, Dr. Calloway explained. He'll need round-the-clock monitoring, but if all goes well, he might be able to go home soon. Emily squeezed Michael's hand. Home. That's exactly where he belongs. As if hearing their conversation, Titan let out a soft huff and slowly blinked his eyes open. His gaze was sluggish but aware, landing first on Michael and then on Emily. Emily let out a half-laugh, half-sob. Hey, big guy. Titan's tail gave a slow wag. Michael grinned, his throat tight with emotion. You scared the hell out of us, buddy. Titan gave a weak but determined attempt to lift his head, only to rest it back down with a deep sigh. Dr. Calloway chuckled. That's a good sign. He's trying. For the first time since the nightmare began, relief washed over them. Titan wasn't just surviving. He was fighting to live. 2 days had passed, and Titan had made incredible progress. His strength was slowly returning, and while he still tired easily, his eyes were brighter, more alert. He could now lift his head on his own and even manage to sit up for brief moments. Dr. Calloway had been monitoring him closely, and on the 3rd morning, she finally gave them the news they had been desperately waiting for. I think he's ready to go home, Emily gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Michael blinked in disbelief before letting out a breath of pure relief. Really? He asked. Dr. Calloway nodded. He still needs rest and limited activity, but being home, surrounded by the people he loves, will help his recovery even more. Emily crouched next to Titan, running her fingers through his fur. Did you hear that, buddy? You're coming home. Titan gave a soft, contented grunt, his tail thumping lightly against the floor. A few hours later, they were on their way back. Michael carried Titan to the car carefully, making sure he was comfortable in the back seat. Noah, though too young to fully understand what had happened, clapped his hands excitedly at the sight of his 4-legged protector. As they pulled into the driveway, Titan lifted his head, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. The moment Michael opened the car door, Titan let out a soft whimper, as if realizing he was truly home. Michael carried him inside, laying him gently on his favorite spot in the living room. Titan rested his head down with a deep sigh, his body finally relaxing. Emily knelt beside him, kissing his head. Welcome home, hero. Titan's tail wagged once, slow but steady. Noah, with his tiny hands, reached out and patted Titan's back. Doggy, he squealed. Titan, despite his exhaustion, licked Noah's hand in response. Michael and Emily shared a glance, both feeling the same overwhelming emotion. Titan had risked his life for their son, and now they would make sure he knew, every single day, just how much he meant to their family. The days that followed were filled with careful recovery and overwhelming love. Titan, though still weak, improved each day. His appetite returned, his energy slowly rebuilt, and before long, he was strong enough to move on his own again. Emily and Michael took turns ensuring he had everything he needed: soft blankets, fresh water, and gentle walks outside. Noah, always by his side, babbled happily at him. as if sharing stories only Titan could understand. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch with Titan resting at his feet, Michael sighed deeply. He reached down, scratching the dog's ears. "You really are something else, you know that?" Titan let out a slow, contented exhale, pressing his head into Michael's touch. Emily stepped outside, holding a small box in her hands. She smiled at Michael before crouching down next to Titan. "We got something for you, big guy." Michael furrowed his brows as Emily opened the box. Inside was a medal, engraved with Titan's name and the words, "Our hero, our family." Emily carefully fastened it to Titan's collar. The dog, as if sensing the importance of the moment, sat up a little straighter, his tail giving a proud wag. Michael chuckled. "Looks good on you, buddy." Titan gave a happy huff, nudging Noah gently as if acknowledging his little human. Later that evening, as the family settled in, Michael looked around at the home filled with warmth, love, and the deep bond they all shared. Titan had done more than save Noah that night. He had proven that love, loyalty, and courage knew no bounds. And for that, he would forever be their greatest hero. Months passed, and Titan had fully recovered, his strength and energy returning in full force. He played with Noah in the backyard, ran alongside Michael on morning jogs, and curled up next to Emily every night. His story had spread through the community, inspiring many. People sent letters, gifts, and messages of admiration. Some even shared how Titan's bravery had reminded them of the unbreakable connection between humans and their canine companions. One afternoon, Michael was approached by a local journalist who wanted to feature Titan in a story about heroism and unconditional love. As they sat for the interview, Titan rested at Michael's feet, his presence as steady and strong as ever. "So," the journalist asked, "what does Titan mean to your family?" Michael smiled, reaching down to ruffle the dog's fur. "He's more than just a pet. He's family. He's proof that heroes come in all shapes and sizes." Titan lifted his head, his eyes gleaming with quiet understanding. He had been given a second chance at life, and he would spend every moment of it protecting the family he